Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me. My name is Peter Postma from FilmLight in Los Angeles. I'm the Managing Director of FilmLight in the Americas. And today, the webinar is titled Managing Complex Timelines. So it's just an opportunity to talk about how to manage complex shows where editorial is constantly changing, new VFX are constantly being dropped in, and how to manage, when you have a lot of media, how to color correct it as quickly as possible and keep up with the updates before the project finally finishes. So the basic topics that I wanted to cover today are going over categories, because that's the key functionality that we use for organizing our media in Baselight. Versioning, which is a really nice way to manage VFX updates as they come in. We'll cover how to manage your metadata in the shots view in Baselight, and the multi-paste window, which is how you can easily copy a grade from one version of an edit to another version of an edit, making sure all the right color grades are attached to the right shots. I'll also preview a new feature in 5.3, which is partial conform, allowing you to run our conform tool on just certain shots in the timeline, and also talk about media import rules, how to use those to manage media that's being brought into your timeline and automatically have it manage the metadata or set the color tags in the right way. So apart from the partial conform, all of this stuff that I'm going to be showing you is in the current release of 5.2 and all stuff you can do now. I'm going to go pretty quickly through some of the basic conform stuff and really actually skip a lot of it. If you want to know more about just the basics of how to bring in an EDL, bring in media to the timeline, I definitely recommend checking out Baselight Student on our website. There's some great tutorials in there that will help you with that. And if you're new to Baselight, hopefully this webinar will show you some of the more powerful tools that are available in Baselight that you'll be able to use. If you're an existing Baselight customer, hopefully there'll be some tips and tricks that you didn't know about. So I'm going to jump into it. I'm just going to hide my camera to save some bandwidth, and we can go full on into Baselight here. So I've got a blank timeline here. I'm going to go into my conform window, and this is one thing we did change between 5.2 and 5.3. is this used to be called EDL import, but this tool was always used to import AAFs and XMLs and XMLs from Final Cut Pro or from Adobe Premiere, as well as CMX EDLs. So just to avoid confusion, it covers all EDL formats. And as I said, for the partial conform, it will also manage the timeline. So I'm just going to load up an Avid AAF here and point it to where my media is located and do a quick conform. I'm going to say, yes, I want to have the container be where my footage is located. And that just means that Baselight is going to remember where all the footage is from this kind of root folder on down. So you usually do always want to set your container when you start a new project, and that way, if you later have to move it to a different SAN volume or you archive it and then bring it back in some other place, as long as the relative directory structure of the files below that container folder are the same, everything will just be there. You don't have to worry about trying to manage relinking or any of that sort of thing. So one of the advantages of AAFs is that you can, and as well as XMLs from Final Cut or from Adobe, is that you can also get image transforms, meaning resize operations, and any speed changes. So I'm going to just say yes to those to make sure those are brought into the conform as well, and hit done now. So now I have a timeline down here, and there were two tracks in this AAF. So I have my main image track here. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can see kind of some more of the shots here. And I have some titles that were brought in as well. So this was the second track on the Avid timeline. And because Baselight works from the top down, the titles are at the bottom here. But I can just add a quick layer in here. Tell it to use the matte, although there is no matte from here. This was just use the Luma channel as the title, so I can do that and copy the same thing over to the other title to get that working. Now, as I said, one of the key ways we have of managing media in your Baselight timeline is through categories, because the thing is that once I start adding layers of color correction onto a shot here, it's the delineation between what's a title and what's not is not going to be as clear already. They're kind of bumping right up against each other. So I'm just going to select these shots while it's still clear that this is separate title stuff, and I'm going to set a category which I've set up called title, and that just adds this colored mark onto the strip so that I know that these shots are part of my title information. Now, these categories, you can totally customize the color and the names of all these. I recommend not going too crazy because these category names and colors are global to your Baselight system, meaning that whatever project you are opening in, the category names are all the same. So you wouldn't want to go and make a bunch of categories that are specific just to one show, because then you end up with a huge list of categories. And even if you go back later and delete them, if you reopen a scene that uses those categories, you get all those category names in your master list again. So it is worth going through and kind of thinking through exactly what kind of categories you want. Like I've made one for flagging shots that need review or need paint work, for temp VFX, and of course this is just titles. Just about the only extra category that comes with Baselight standard is this editorial category. And if we go back to my conform window, when I brought in the AAF and told it that yes, I wanted to apply transforms, it also asked me what category I want to put those transforms in. So by default, it puts it on layer 99 and flags it with an editorial category so that it's automatically easier to keep track of those resizes. So here's a shot that has a resize on it. If I move my cursor up here, I can look at the original footage. That's the footage with the resize on it. And it's got this little red slant on it, meaning that it's part of an editorial category. Now, one of the nice things about that is that if I do a color grade on this image and then want to apply this same color grade to another shot, if I don't tell Baselight otherwise, it's going to treat all these layers as the same. So if I drag and drop this color grade, it's going to apply the resize operation to this other shot as well, which is not really what I want. But if I go into my scene settings and on the category tab here, I can actually tell it that I don't want to bypass or copy or paste anything, basically to kind of ignore, for color correction purposes, anything with this editorial flag on it. And that means that now when I drag and drop, it's only copying the color grade over, it's not copying over the editorial resize operation. And this would apply to other things as well. If you do like paint work or things like that, which is part of an assist or editorial process, you can flag that with editorial. And then when you're going in and coloring and copying grades around, you won't accidentally copy over paint strokes and things like that as well. The other advantage is that I flagged it not to bypass the transform category. So when I do bypass all, it's only bypassing the color. Because if I turn that back off, say bypass everything, it's a little bit harder to judge the color difference when you got the image jumping in and out. So if I re-enable that, tell it to bypass on editorial, then I'm only seeing the color change when I do hit the bypass all button, which is a nice little shortcut. Now these categories can be used for you to help keep track of different things that are going on in the timeline. And you can set up your numeric keypad to quickly tag things in different categories. So if I go into my numeric keypad settings here, go to configure mark shot keypads, you can see I have like keypad number 1, flags to need review, number 2, flag for editorial. I also have a temp VFX flag and a needs paint flag. And you can customize these so that at a key press, it'll add a certain type of mark, which is like marking a specific frame in the timeline, or to add a category, which basically applies to the whole shot. So if I go through and okay, I know there's going to be some beauty work or something in this timeline, I can just say, okay, that shot's going to need paint. This shot's going to need paint, and go through and just start flagging a couple of those shots. Or if I'm told by production that, okay, there's some continuity error issues with these cards here, so these are temp VFX, I can flag them with the temp VFX category. So you can see when I hit the 3 button on my keyboard, it adds that category flag to the image. And now you can view and use these categories in several different ways. Let me just find a few more shots here to throw into that category. Just so they're kind of scattered around the timeline a bit here. So now this is often useful for clients who want to see that, so that when like the DP or the director walks in and they're not sure what's final or what's not, you can actually put that category flag up on the screen for them. So if I turn on my counters, I can disable the time code if I don't want that, but I leave the category flag up here. And say this was flagged in, as need paint, which is kind of my own information, or flagged for some other reason as well. If the client is only worried about seeing the temp VFX flags, I can just say, yeah, only show the temp VFX flag up on the screen. And if they want to see it in a more obvious place, I can just hold down the K key, move it around so it's actually on the image. And now, yeah, anytime they're on a temp VFX, this will be going on the main image output to the projector or the SDI monitor that you may be using. Another place where categories are shown is in client view. So I can start up my client view here, which is basically a web page that's served to, it could be a laptop or an iPad or something like that in your room. And if I switch over to my web view here and just quickly log in, I can see an overview of the timeline, again, with the category flags that have been made on these shots. So this allows the customer to check to make sure which version of the effect shots they have in. They can see the name, they can see other metadata like clip name and stuff like that. And this client view is all built through the FilmLight API. So this is all customizable. You can brand this view with your own branding. You can have it show other metadata if you want. One of the interesting things too is that clients can actually add their own flags to flag shots, or add a note onto shots. So say we need, we know that, oh, this needs to go back for some work because we see the camera in his glasses. We can just make a note of that. And this is all done, as I said, on the client's iPad or laptop with a web browser. And now when I go back into Baselight, if I bring up my shots view, I can view any comments or flags that the client made. So the shots view here is kind of like a metadata overview of all the shots in the timeline. It tells me all the clips that came in. It has the same category flags and stuff like that in it. And I can create a new tab which has a filter for client data. So I can show any shot that has notes, and I can see the note here on the client data tab, or I can just say, just show me any one that was flagged by the client, so I can address what they want to see. Categories are also extremely useful for render operations. So remember at the very beginning, I had put the titles in their own category. So now if I have to deliver a textless version of this show without the titles, I can do that quite easily by going into my render settings. There's a bypass category option, and I could say bypass anything with the title category on it. So it's effectively rendering this with the titles bypassed, so I don't have the title in there, but I don't actually have to change anything in my timeline. I could just set up a deliverable, which is my textless one, and tell it to bypass titles, and then I get the textless deliveries. Now as well, if I only need to render out certain shots in my, I could tell it not to render all frames, but only frames in a certain category. Like, again, if we just need to render the title shots, I could do that. One thing to watch out for with this is that if you do categories containing shots, it will only do the length of the shot that's actually flagged. So in this case, the title is on part of the shot and then it comes off. If I do this in the render view, it's only showing me the frames that are actually flagged with titles. But I can get around that. There's also a selection. Obviously, I can select shots. So I can just say select title, and I can select stacks containing strips. So that'll select the whole shot that even has like partially a title on it. And if I just do those selected shots in my render view, I now have the full range of those titles that I can render out. So that's handy. And of course, if I just needed to render out, say, like the temp VFX shots, I could just do that. Say, yeah, find the temp VFX shots and render those out. Just to hop back into shots view here again. Another way I can use these categories is for generating reports and stuff like that. So if I need to let the producer know which shots in my timeline are still temp VFX shots, I can change this filter, we'll call this temp VFX, and make this a filter on the category of temp VFX. So it's showing me all the temp VFX shots. And now I can go into my export window here, export a report. And if I set this to just temp VFX shots, it'll generate a report which has everything that's flagged as a temp VFX, just as a PDF that I could email to a producer or what have you. And you can customize what metadata is shown on here. If they only want, source time code and tape name or whatever, you can limit this to just the information you want to put in here, just by changing which fields you have exposed in the shots view. And this tab is separate from other tabs. So like if we don't need camera and scene and take information on here, that's fine for the temp VFX role, temp VFX tab, but the all shots tab will still have that information viewable if I want it. So a common issue you have to deal with on shows that have a lot of VFX shots is getting updates of those VFX shots. So sometimes you'll be sent a change list EDL which only has the new shots in them. So I'm going to zoom out on this timeline, go back into my conform window, and I have an update AAF, which is just for some shots that were changed. So I'm not like lengthening shots or shortening shots. I'm just swapping out new VFX or swapping out takes. So they just sent a change EDL. And when you do that, you can also have it automatically flag any shots that get brought in by this AAF with the category. So I want to review all the new shots that come in. So I'm going to have them tagged with this need review category when they get brought in. I do start conform. And it brings in those shots. Because it's an AF, it also brought in a big color strip at the head there that I don't need. But yeah, I have a couple new shots on here. And now, again, if I go back into my shots view, I could set up a filter which is for need review. And set that up with the categories of need review, and it just shows me those shots which now need attention to be brought into the timeline. So the way I brought these in is basically as a new layer down on the timeline here, so that if I had so they just swapped out a take here. If I had a different shot with some color correction on it, I could check to see, okay, I could bring this up, manually just to make sure. I could kind of A/B swap it, see how the color is tracking. If I'm happy with the color, I can delete that and do Shift-1 on my keyboard, which will remove that flag saying, okay, I reviewed that take. These ones, they don't have color on them, so they're fine. I'll just delete the old ones and figure those tags so to show that I've reviewed everything. And then I could do a timeline alignment, which is just command semicolon, and that brings everything back to the bottom of the timeline, so it's all nice and aligned and ready for color. So that's sort of the traditional way of doing a VFX update. But in 5.2, we added the capability to do more sophisticated shot versioning just based on file names. So I'm going to bring in a different timeline that's a little more VFX heavy. So I'll go back into my conform window, point it to the EDL, and again, make sure I'm looking at where this source footage is. Now, if you look at the tape names that are identified in this EDL, you'll see some of them have this VO1, VO4 in it. So I have detect versions enabled in my conform settings, which basically says it's looking for V in a number to signify that, okay, this is a VFX shot and there may be multiple versions of this delivered. Now, when I do the conform, it's only going to look for the ones that are specifically called out in this EDL. So if I just do start conform here, again, I'll let it set my container. I now have a conforms timeline. If I jump to the end of the timeline, I know I have a VFX shot here with a robot coming out. And this is already version 4. This is the final version of this shot. And it's given me this little pull down because it said that, well, there may be other versions here because it detected there's a version number in this folder name or file name. So I can just on this individual shot, I can say check for new versions. It'll tell me that, yeah, this does need an update. It'll ask if I want to flag any updates it makes with this category. So I'll just hit, I'm just doing one shot right now, so I'll just hit update. And there's no newer version, but there was actually an older version on here. So again, the EDL only points, or will only load what's in the EDL when you do the initial conform, but you can do this check for update and it'll find any older versions or newer versions on here. So I can see the original plate and I can switch over to the VFX shot. And you can do that for the whole timeline in one go. So if I go under my scene menu, I go check for new sequence versions. Again, it's now going to tell me that there's another sequence that needs update. There's 8 of them that don't, but I'll just hit update sequences and it flags for me with this needs review flag saying, okay, there was a new version of this. So V1 was the one that came in with the EDL. V2 is now available. Looks like this is not quite the finished VFX shot it's supposed to be. There's actually a glitch there. But yeah, I can see the different versions of the VFX shot. And when you do color grade on this, so say we actually want this to have kind of a more bluer look, that color grade stays. You're really just changing the media out from underneath it. So let's load in a bunch more VFX shots. I'm going to switch just to my Mac file copy, but you could just as easily copy these files using the Flux Manage tool built into Baselight, or this could be just someone in your I/O department copying additional VFX files that were just delivered onto the SAN. But because they have these version numbers in it, when I now do check for new versions, it tells me, yep, there's 8 new shots that needs update. I'll have it again, flag shots that needs review. And so, yeah, there's now even a later version of this shot. It's jumped up to version 5, and it's the final version with everything in it. So there's version 1, there's version 2, there's the final version of this VFX shot. Here's another one, which was just like a simple screen replacement. So that's the original plate. That's with the screen replacement on it. So you can go through, and again, I can set up I can set up a tab in shots view to just filter for the shots that need review and go through them that way. If you prefer to use marks, that's an option as well. I can go into my selection menu here, select all the shots that have this need review flag on them. And then under marks, I can just say toggle mark for selected strips. And then I'll turn on group grading here and just clear the category tag from all those shots because they're now marked. And I can now just jump between the marked shots to see what the updates were to all these shots. If I'm happy with how they look, I can say, yep, I've looked at those and just hit the delete mark key to clear the mark. So however you want to work, there's a lot of different ways you can kind of take advantage of this. Now, this file versioning is very similar to the way it's done in Nuke and some other applications, so it's really convenient for plugging into VFX pipeline. The one caveat is that by default, it will always choose the highest number of versions. So say they've delivered 15 versions of a VFX shot, but version 11 is the one that they really want in the movie. You can always manually go back and select an earlier version, but then if another update comes and more shots get dropped in, it may end up back on version 15 again. So if you're using this workflow, I do recommend making the highest number version the final version. If you want version 11 to be the final one, make that 16. So just make a copy of it, make it 16, so it is the highest number. The other thing to watch out for is just that, of course, if you change the setting here, like if I were to change it because I just wanted to look at the background plate, see what it looked like, see what the changes were. If I hit render right now, it's going to render with the background plate on. So you just want to make sure, if you are going through and changing these versions, that you do leave it on the version you actually want to have in your final render. And yeah, if you do leave it on an earlier version, it will stay there. Now, there's another way of doing this versioning if you want, which has some additional benefits, and that's with open clip files. And open clip files were a standard originally published by Autodesk. I'm just going to switch over and show you what one of these open clip files looks like. It's basically just an XML file, and they can have tons of metadata in them. They can have, time codes and timestamp dates and information about what commands were used on a render farm to generate these VFX shots or all that sorts of stuff. The only bits Baselight is really interested in are what the paths to the file are and what the current version number is. So the advantage of an open clip file is that you don't have to file any naming convention. You don't have to have the VO1, VO2, etc. in your file name. You could even have these shots scattered on different sand volumes, different folders, whatever. As long as the XML points to where each version is explicitly, they can be named whatever you want. The disadvantage is that these open clip files have to be generated for your clips, and anytime there's an update, anytime there's a new version, you have to update the open clip file with that additional information. So this is most commonly used by either really big VFX shows that have a set pipeline for VFX, or more importantly, animated shows where they already have all sorts of tools to automate their render farms, and they'll just have it that, okay, whenever a new version of a shot is rendered, it will also update the open clip file to provide the new version information and set the current version and all that. So I'll just show you really quickly. I'll delete everything that's in my timeline here and show you what an open clip conform looks like. So I'll go back into my conform window, pull in the EDL, point it at where my media is. Now you'll see this EDL, there are no version numbers in the tape names. They're all just the original kind of tape names without version numbers in them. And I'm gonna hit this use open clip button here to tell it that I want to load a bunch of open clip files. And I don't have open clip files for every single shot. I only have it for the VFX shots that are being versioned, and that's fine. If I hit restrict, it would only load shots that have open clip files associated with them. But in this case, it's a mix of VFX and just camera original stuff, so I'm going to leave that off. Hit start conform. And so one of the differences between the versioning conform and the open clip conform is if I go to the end of my timeline again here, it right away has loaded in all the versions that were pointed to by that open clip file. So without having to check for updates or anything that was referenced in that file is there. The other nice thing is that you can name these. So we can actually name the original, the plate, and then there was just a layout composition and then a final version. So that's a little nice. It's not just a version number. You can actually name these. And that is, again, just based on what the naming is in the XML file that's being loaded. Other than that, checking for versions, all that kind of stuff is the same. I can check for new sequence versions. If there's any updates, it'll tell me. In this case, there's some timestamp changes, but there's no actual updates to the substance of the open clip files. So when I hit update, nothing happens. But if we did have a change to open clip file, it would be flagged just like it would when you do VFX versioning change. So that's pretty cool for versioning. I'm going to go back to our other timeline here and just talk a little bit more about kind of grading and managing shots. One question we get a fair amount is for like a C mode sort, which is basically showing the shots in the order they were shot on set, the order they required, not necessarily the way they're ordered in the timeline. So if I bring up my shots view here, I can go to a thumbnail view. Oops, and kind of get an overview of just kind of all the shots in this timeline. So there's a bunch of cutting back and forth between camera positions and stuff like that. So to make it easier to color grade some of those shots, I can actually just say I want to order these shots by tape name. So this will be the, because the tape names were incremental on the camera, that's the order they were shot in. So it's automatically ordering by source timecode as well. So this is basically a C mode sort that I've done, at least just in the shots view. If I enable this playback navigation tab, that also will change my cuts view down here. So if I say go and select the shots of the card dealer here, and there's another setup with a few shots, so I can select those two. So I now see on my cut view that I have the shots, and if I just hit next cut, next cut, next cut, I'm just jumping around through these shots. But the timeline stays in record order, so I can actually see simultaneously both what the source order, the C mode order is up here, and the record order of the timeline is down there. And if I turn on group grading, I can change all these shots at once. So if I just add a color correction layer, make these shots a little bit brighter, I can do that. And there's a bunch of different viewing modes you can use too to view all these shots at once. So if I go to view 9, that shows me all the shots that I have as a part of my current selection. So even the shots that are, were shot earlier from a different take, those are all here. And the nice thing is that with the group grading, I can leave these shots selected. And so like if just this shot needs a little extra contrast, I've taken off group grading, so which is just Control G, so the red squares aren't blinking anymore, which means I'm only, even though I have multiple shots selected, I'm only adjusting one shot, and I can increase the contrast just on this one shot. But then if I want to change the color of all of them, I just hit group grade again. They're all flashing now, so they're all going to get the same color grade. So if I want to make these all warmer, I can make all these shots all warmer at the same time. And you can do Control Tab to quickly swap between different filtering. So if I go back to no filtering, that will get me back to the, if I go to view 5, that will get me back to the timecode order of the EDL. And just to make my life easier, I'm going to go back into the shots view here, clear out some of these tabs so that I just have my all shots tab, which is sorted by tape name. And by default, there's also a no filtering option. So this just allows me to really quickly swap between seeing everything in timeline order and seeing everything in the order in which it was shot. And again, as long as that playback navigation button is enabled, when I just do like jump to next cut, it's going by the order that I'm sorted in. So right now it's going by the C mode order. If I change back to no filtering, it's now going in just normal cut order. So that's nice for managing groups of shots. And there's all kinds of filtering and sorting you can do in the shots view to help with color grading. Like say I wanted to do a new tab just for the R3D files because I want to do something different to my red files than everything else. So I'll just deselect stuff here. So I have a setup which is a filter here, which is media type. If I set that to R3D movie, it will show me all the R3D files. And this sequence happens to be pretty much all red footage. But if I had, some QuickTime files which I needed to handle differently, or I wanted to do a different color correction, just all the ARRI raw stuff, I could just filter for those different types of cameras and then, group grade them and do an offset to all those shots. There's also useful stuff in here, like I can just set up, there's a default tab that I deleted, but there's a tab you could set up for has grade versus not has grade. So if I just want to go through, so has grade is set to no, I can quickly see which shots have not been touched with the color correction yet. We also have one for like has speed change. So if you want to check any shots that have a speed change, which came in from editorial, just to make sure there's no artifacts or things like that, I can go into my retime operator here. I can see there's a speed change. And I just make sure that, yeah, if I go to high quality optical flow resize, that there's no artifacts or anything like that with the optical flow. So checking things like that is really handy. Especially because in Baselight, there are two ways of doing a speed change. If it's a variable speed change like this, where the shot is speeding up and then slowing down again, you get this retime operator in here. If it were just like a constant half speed shot or whatever, you would just have increment 0.5 and you wouldn't see this retime operator at all. So that's rather than have to look in two places to find where all your retimes are, just setting up this filter for has speed change and shot view will show you all the shots that use it either way. So that's quite nice. All right, so let's talk about, say we've done some color grading and then a whole new edit comes in. And again, when you're just swapping the effect shots or swapping takes without making a shot shorter or longer, you can just use the versioning or use an overcut EDL to drop things in. When there's a significant change to the timeline, shots being added, shots being removed, some being lengthened, some being shortened, you're pretty much going to want to do a clean conform into a new timeline and then copy the color grades from the old one into the new one. So I actually have another scene here with the color grade that was already done to it. And this is a different cut. So it has some different shots in different orders. Some of the shots are different lengths, but everything has a color grade on it. So I can just select all these shots and hit Control C to copy them. And then if I go into the conform that we did, I can just select all, and I'll bring up my multi-paste window. So this basically controls how the images, how the color grades are going to be copied from the old timeline into the new one. And basically, it's going to look at the metadata of the source clips and look for matching tape names and time codes. But I can change this if the tape names between the two edits are not consistent because, you know, editorial was changing stuff willy-nilly. I could go by file name or I could go by clip name. So pretty much most of the metadata that you track in shots view, you can use to make sure that the right grades are getting applied to the right shots as well. And there's a couple nice things you can do in multi-paste as well. Like in both cases, I conformed off AAFs. So the this other timeline has some editorial, you know, resize changes on them. And that may have changed in editing. That may have been part of the cut changes. They changed some of the resizes and stuff like that. So I don't necessarily want to copy over those resizes. I want to use the ones that came in with the AAF I was just given. So by setting up to not copy stuff in the editorial category and not overwrite anything in the editorial category on the new conform that we've done, that will make sure that, yeah, all those editorial changes that were in the AAF are preserved between edits. But I just hit multi-paste here. It'll confirm that, yeah, it's found matches for all those shots, unambiguous matches. Again, if there's keyframes or tracking or things like that, it will also make sure that, you know, any shapes and things like that, which have trackers on them, they're pasted on the right keyframe, so it's exactly like it was in the previous color grade. So this is useful as well when you have multiple versions to deliver. Say it's a commercial spot and you have a 2-minute version, but then a 1-minute cut and a 30-second cut and a 15-second cut or whatever. You can do your color grading in one of those cuts and then just multi-paste it into the other ones. But we give you some extra tools to also track changes and things like that in your conform. So say we go to this and we had done some color changes. Say they wanted to make this shot greener and the next shot greener as well, maybe a little bit darker, boost the highlights, whatever we want to do. So we've got 2 grade changes now, and we want to paste this into the other versions of our deliverable. Again, I could just select the whole timeline, hit copy, go to our conform, select all, and now when I do a multi-paste, I can tell it that I want it to detect grade changes, which means it's going to flag anything that has a new grade on it. So if the grade was the same as the first time I did the multi-paste, then it's not going to flag it, but if it has changed it, it'll flag it for me. So now when I hit multi-paste, it flags any shots that were changed. I can go back into my shots view, set up my category filter for needs review, and I can see which shots changed. And so I can just make sure, yep, that color still works for this shot. This shot is actually now in a completely different place in the timeline. They're not next to each other anymore. So if for continuity reasons I need to change this grade a little bit, you know, I could change this grade and do whatever I need to do to it. And again, hit Shift 1, that'll clear my flag showing that I've reviewed that. Another nice option in the multi-paste is you can do a fuzzy match, which just means that if the file name doesn't match exactly, it will still be able to match the new version. So say like we did have VO1, VO4, stuff like that in our tape name. So the original cut had version 1 of the VFX shot and the new cut had version 4 of the VFX shot. If I do an exact match to the tape name, it won't match the color grade because the tape name is different. If I do a fuzzy match, it'll look for, it'll basically ignore any extra characters. It'll start looking for partial matches. And if it finds multiple matches, it'll say, well, this is ambiguous, we can't do it. But if it sees that, oh, it's just the version number changing, otherwise there's an exact match to this shot, it'll find a match. And it's not dependent on just using that VO1. It could be like you have a shot name that has, you know, dirt fix in it or painted or, you know, VFX final. It doesn't matter as long as there's enough of the file name that is unique and doesn't match to, or enough of the tape name, I should say, or file name, depending on what you've set it to, that matches the original version, then it'll find that match and it will copy the grades all into the right place. So again, everything I've been showing you is in 5.2. I want to show you one 5.3 version feature now. I'm just going to open up another scene to do a fresh conform because I want to show you the partial conform functionality. So if we again conform the original project that we did here, the full cut, but I'm going to point it at a different set of media now that was treated a little bit differently. So actually, I'm going to call this conform settings. Again, I'm going to set the container. So what happened on some of these shots is that there was a problem on set with HMI flicker. So some of these shots, if we just step through it here, you can see there's some flicker in the lighting that was going on. And this is pretty easy to fix in Baselight. We just have a deflicker we can add in. This is a pretty heavy flicker, so I'm just going to up the settings a little bit, and that gets rid of it. But for whatever reason, this production wanted to render that flicker fix offline and bring in clean shots, or bring in shots that had the deflicker baked into it, which is fine. But when they did that, they changed the names of the shots so they didn't match up correctly with the conform. So let's take a look in shots view and kind of just see what we're missing here. So there's a whole bunch of shots missing actually. Two of these are actually the titles because the titles were not in this directory. So I can select just the titles. So you see I'm not loading an EDL, I'm just loading the currently selected shots. I've pointed it to the folder where the titles are. And now if I hit start conform, well, they should be there. Yep, there they are. So now I've brought my titles in, but there's a whole bunch of other shots that are missing, which are the ones that had this flicker fix applied to them. So there's a shortcut in here for select missing material. Now that select missing material button's been there for a long time. So the way you'd have to do this in the current release of 5.2 is basically conform the timeline once, do select missing material, delete those shots, conform the timeline a second time to have it fill the gaps, and then basically kind of do an alignment to merge those two conform passes together. So it was doable, but it was just kind of a few extra steps and a little bit messier. Now I can just do select missing material. I can conform these selected shots. I could point it at where the deflickered files are and just tell it to run a conform, run through all the iterations to find the files, and it goes ahead and it finds them. So the information it's using to do that conform did come from the EDL itself. So if we look at some of these shots, we can see that it has a tape name and source time code. All this stuff came from the AAF. I can actually tell Baselight to go back and use the original tape names that were part of the file. So you can see why the conform initially failed is because they truncated the tape name and put fixed on it, which wasn't very helpful, but we were able to deal with it here. So you can also manually update these tape names to have it conform as well. So like if I want to set these manually back to the clip name information, there's a couple different ways to do that. So one thing that we also have going on here is that these shots are OpenEXR files, and they didn't have any color grading information on them, so they were actually rendered to red linear, red wide gamut. And the only reason they came in correctly with that color was because I went ahead and changed some settings. So when you're dealing with this, when you have mixed media, stuff coming in from different sources, you can set a default input color space. So if I know most of my VFX shots are coming in as red linear, red wide gamut to match the other red footage in the timeline, I could set that as the default. It will still, when there is metadata telling it, hey, this is area files, hey, these are Rec 709, it'll use that, but it'll fall back on red linear. But what if you have a mix of red files and drone footage and some DJI log and titles that are Rec 709? For that, we can set up media import rules. And these are rules that just tell it that, okay, I can say, so again, matching on any kind of the metadata that we're tracking. So say anytime we bring in an OpenEXR file, we can set that to use red linear, red wide gamut for the shots. And so now anytime a new EXR file is dropped into the scene, well, I can apply it right now to all shots, saying any EXR files that were missed, make sure these settings are applied. and any new ones that are dropped in either through the conform window or through just like manually dropping them in from Flux Browser will get this fix applied to them. And you can do other things as well. So say we wanted to fix up the tape names on here, we could say set the clip name into the tape name field on these OpenEXR shots. And when I apply it now, it will automatically apply and update those tape names. And again, any new EXR files that were manually brought in would get those updates as well. And you can set up multiple media rules for different types of media. So and you could key it off, again, the file name, you could key it off, like if there's a CDL or not to do something with it. But I could do something else with ARRI raw files that come in. So this is a really nice tool to use when you do have media coming in drips and drabs throughout the course of a show, and you want to just kind of have it automate some of the stuff you need to do to make sure that it's brought in the right color space with the right metadata and all that. You can, in Shots View, also use all kinds of variable substitution and stuff. So if we wanted, we could, again, turn on group grading here to change all these shots, and I could just put in clip, which again sets the tape name to the clip name. It confirms, yes, you want to do this to all shots, but the clip name has .mov in it, so I could actually say, well, give me just the first 16 characters of the clip name, and it will, oops, if I typed it correctly, it will give me just the first 16 characters there. So you can do stuff like that. You can even set up an expression that just automatically is constantly being reevaluated. So I could say, again, tape name field is the clip name field, but maybe I want to set it back to what it originally was. So I can set just the first 9 characters with fixed, and that will update all my tape names. And so if I needed to, I could fix these tape names, then run a conform, and if I ran a conform, it would use this information as a part of that. So that's pretty much what I wanted to show you guys in terms of just some tips and tricks to manage the timeline. I did want to point out that all of the stuff I've been setting, like media import rules, all the different filters in the shots view, render settings, scene settings, all that stuff is stored in a template. So if I go into my job manager here and I want to do a new scene using conform 4 as a template, call this webinar, I still have all the media import rules that I set up for that. I still have any filters and things like that I set up in shots view in there. So once you kind of get the filter settings and things like that set up the way you want, you just keep using that scene as a template, or you can actually save this explicitly into a templates folder. And then when you do a new scene, you would just get an option to use that scene as a template if you set up a job that has the templates in it. So that's it. I'm going to turn my camera back on here, and we have a little bit of time for Q&A. So let's take a look at what questions we have coming. All right, so again, everything that I've showed you apart from the partial conform was in 5.2. And then I had a question here about the media import rules. Are they global to Baselight or specific to one scene or job? Yeah, they're specific to the scene. But as I showed you, you could use the templates to copy them into new scenes as you generate them. Some of the settings in here, like multi-paste as well. So the multi-paste settings are also part of the template, but you can also create custom settings. So if you have different multi-paste settings you use depending on, like if you're checking for grade changes or not, or you need to preserve editorial or not, you can just save those as different versions, and it just adds different pages here for different settings that you can save them as. The similar thing like for the conform settings, it will remember whatever the conform settings were for the last time I did a conform, but you can also store these settings for different shows depending on what the editorial workflow is and copy those. I had another question about, is it possible to multi-paste sound? It's not currently possible. In the multi-paste view, I should have mentioned, there is the option to multi-paste metadata, which can be quite handy. So you can say, like, just paste, so say you've done a bunch of work to clean up tape names or clip names or things like that, you can have it paste that metadata. You can have it paste You can have it paste any category flags as well that you've added in. So you could say like just certain category flags. If you've already marked some stuff as 10p effects that you want marked in the new timeline as well, you can have it copy those categories over. And actually, sorry, for if you attached audio to layer 0, you can have it also copy in the information from layer 0 and include audio or exclude audio. So does multipaste give information about shots that are lengthened or shortened? No, currently it does not. When you do a multipaste, show you which shots have been extended or not. There is an icon on this strip which will show you when there are keyframes or when there is a tracker on a shot. So you can just kind of jump to those shapes and things that have keyframes on them to check those if you need to. We do also have a scene compare tool. So if I go in and do, see if I can show you this really quick. So in the scene settings here, there is, or sorry, in the view menu here, there is a scene compare tool which allows you to compare edits changes between two scenes. So if I have two cuts open, I can say yes, conform to the alternate grade version, and it will flag any changes between the shots. So that's a way to see which shots are changed and which shots have not. Another question here about categories. Is it possible to make them specific to a job rather than global? No, it's not currently. What I recommend with the categories is if you're at a facility with multiple baselights, you have the ability to set up site settings, which is basically just a file that all the baselights can point to that have settings global to your all the baselights at your facility or all the baselights in your working group. And I would put the categories in there. And that way everyone always has the same categories. If someone inadvertently creates some extra categories just by going into preferences and adding in categories, that will be added just in their user settings. And then at any point you can clear out their user settings and they'll just be back to having the global site settings. So I do recommend for categories, yeah, putting them in the site settings. And another question here just about managing ASC CDL files or things like that that come into a scene. So that's all managed through the multipaste window. So I can use as a source for my multipaste window CCC files, which would be ASC CDL color corrections or individual CDL files. And again, I would tell it what metadata information in the CDL file would match the information in my timeline to paste the color grades in that way. I can also extract metadata from ALE or EDL files in here. You can also copy grades from multiple scenes. So say you've done a whole sequence, a whole series of multiple days of shooting with Baselight doing your dailies, and you want to copy the grades, those daily grades into your scenes. You can just say, I want to point it to a whole job folder full of scenes, and it'll open up all those scenes, pull in all the grades, paste them into your timeline for any matching shots it's found. So the multipaste tool is really powerful for all that stuff. It can also be used for LUT files. So if you have a production that is doing LUTs per shot, you can have it bring in LUTs and apply those as well. And just one last question about how to manage the keypad, how to manage categories on the keypad, because I did that really early in the beginning. So if I go into the edit menu, you can set your numeric keypad mode to grading, which gives you like printer light bumps basically, to navigation, which means that you type in a time code or a frame number, it'll jump to that time code or frame number. But when I have it set to mark shot categories, it will then, if I go into configure, it'll follow these rules for adding different kinds of marks or categories. So you always have a default category that you can set just with the J key. That's set in the marks menu up here. I can set like if I want my defaults to just be a needs review category, then when I hit that, it adds that category onto it. But if I want to set up the number pads for different ones, I could set that up in the navigation and keypad menu here. And then if you're on a blackboard, you have a dedicated button for setting categories. So you can leave the keypad on grading or navigation if you want, and just use the blackboard key. And when you hit that, it'll show the 9 categories that you've pre-programmed to the blackboard and allow you to apply them there. So that's all the time we have for questions, but I will go through and reply to some more of those questions individually in an email. Thank you all again for attending the webinar. And I just want to let you know our next webinar is going to be on, it's called Store, Render, and Animate, all about our storage offerings and having dedicated render nodes, managing your render queue, and some really cool tools we've been working on for that. So you'll be getting an email about that soon. It'll be on May 21st. And thanks again. I'll see you guys next time.